Hello folks, Steve Lentz here with Discover Options. Welcome to this edition of the Inside Wire. It is September 19th, 2017. Presented material is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as personalized financial advice. Past results are not necessarily indicative of future performance. Today, we're going to continue from where we left off last week in discussing best practices of the out-of-the-money put broken wing butterfly. Several researchers and educators have gone down this road. It's a very effective way to trade. We have Frank Fahey joining us here. He's in the attendee list live, so that's awesome. Thanks, Frank, for joining in. We spoke quite a bit over the weekend about what we're going to present here today, and that is the upside adjustments, a very brief index of upside adjustments. And so without further ado, let's do a review of what we discussed in part one, which is initiating a real strong broken wing butterfly position. And we came up with the parameters as described right here. 60 to 85 days out. We have three strikes. The short put, we start that first at a delta of minus 30, or the strike that's closest to minus 30. For the next strike selection, we go further out of the money to find our most distant out-of-the-money long put that's 5% farther out of the money, 5% of the index value farther out, okay? Farther out. And then once we have that strike selected, we then go and look at the at-the-money or near-the-money long put. It might be in the money. We call that the delta adjuster. We're going to find the strike that gets us as close to delta zero as possible. Now, along the way, at any time, if we can gravitate to a 25-point strike, we will do so. The open interest is better at those strikes in the SPX especially, and we will certainly gravitate towards the 25-point strikes. When you do the delta adjuster, more often than not, you're going to satisfy this requirement down here that the entry debit should be less than 5% of the initial capital required. Okay, so if you have a $10,000 requirement, the debit needs to be under 500, for example. But if you do this delta adjuster approach, and you're going to be real close, if not certainly meeting that requirement most of the time. And then we're going to walk into risk. This is a part of best practices, is that we put on half a position initially, then with at least take our required capital, or take the amount of capital allocated to this campaign, put on a half a position first, wait, and put on the other half of your position later. So we walk into risk. That is, we're going to scale in by halves. Okay, let's look at an example. We did this last week, November 2nd of 2016. Just a real quick example. We have a delta of minus 30 right here. That's our short strike. Okay, we then calculate 10% further out from about almost 2100. That takes us down to the 1925 strike. It took us to the 1920, but as I said, we're going to gravitate up to that 25-point strike when we can. And at that point, we look at the delta. And now we're going to go hunting for the best strike that satisfies getting that delta as close to zero as possible. And we have a 5-lot. We need to place somewhere up closer to being at the money. And when we do that, we gravitate to the 2090s. When we buy 5 of those, that takes our delta as close to zero as we're ever going to get here of minus 2.2. That's pretty darn good. All right, when we analyze this now, when we just notice that our net debit is minus 639, our net requirement is 18,139. That works out to about 3.5% of the net requirement. So that the requirement that it's under 5% is satisfied, and that's a nice little, just a good rule of thumb. All right, so that's our initial position. Now, before we analyze it, the question here is what input for volatility are we going to use? So when we analyze it and we look at expected return, we look at probabilities, any of that stuff, we need to have a proper implied volatility input in the SV box up here. And what we like to do is use the approach that I talked about on May 23rd of 17 in that inside wire, where we initially start with this 15%. Then we go and look at the first strike outside the first standard deviation, and we substitute back into this box that particular implied volatility, and away we go. So that's what we do here. And when we analyze, this is the typical look you're going to get of our initial butterfly. One moment here. Let me get a sip of coffee here. Just a sec. Typical look of the butterfly when we initiate this. And what we did is we looked at other approaches to initiating an out-of-the-money put broken wing butterfly. And we're going out 30 days to take a look. You can also go out 10 days and just get a feel for what your short-term outlook is here. But we note that out 30 days, our break even on the upside at 30 days out is right at about just shy of a standard deviation to the upside, and on the downside, we're outside that first standard deviation. So looking pretty good here. Looking pretty good. What we did also is we compared the best practices broken wing to 3 other approaches that are quite available out there. The rules are available for free. Rhino, the road trip, and the Kevlar. I've discussed this in Inside Wires before. And we evaluated all 4 and compared them in terms of expected return down here. And when we did that, we looked at both 2 different environments. We looked at a high IV percentile environment and a low IV percentile environment. We looked at the expected return and the standard deviation of the data points that comprised that expected return, and we found that the best practices gave us a positive expected return, and the standard deviation was the lowest of all 3 of the others, or of all 4 approaches. The best practices had the lowest standard deviation, which is nice, and you can kind of just tell, looking at this, that we have the blue line is a bit flatter and is going to give you less drama than the others. That's kind of what we're looking for in terms of having a good, consistent, more conservative approach to doing these. All right, so that's where we left off last week. Now we're moving into upside adjustments. Upside adjustments. First, we have an out-of-the-money call side butterfly that we could use. In other words, when the market goes up, what are we going to do? If the market starts tearing off to the upside, what are we going to do at that point? Well, we can do one of 2 things to start off with. Next week, I'm going to look at this, an out-of-the-money call side butterfly. All right, and that's what's also been known as a white rhino. And there's a whole approach there, and you go down a complete set of analysis when you do it that way. But instead, today we're going to focus on, for part 2, scaling in a second put butterfly in the same fashion as we did the first. All right, and that's what we're going to look at today. And then after you do that, what do you do if the market keeps going up at that point? Well, there's 3 approaches we could do. We're going to talk about the reverse Harvey, buying a call, and rolling a short. Rolling the short. We'll look at those 3. But initially, let's take a look at just what we're going to get to part 3. So here we are. We have our initial position. And I'm using February 8th as just a starting date here, where I put this on in BackTrader, and you can go to this date and time and these strikes and do the same thing yourself. And when you do that, this is what you would get. And 5 days later, we see that the market has moved up quite a bit. And the question is, well, now what do we do? Okay, do we need to make a change, and why, and then what do we do? Well, there's 2 things we can do. As I talked about, one, let's just look at this call side butterfly. We could add a butterfly out here, okay? And they call it a rhinoceros because you got 2 horns here. But that's one approach to addressing this issue of what to do if the market tears off to the upside. is you have another butterfly on the calls that you can do, and that's, as I said, going to take us down a completely different path. Let's instead go look at doing this, scaling in a second put butterfly in the same fashion. And this is, you know, of all the approaches taught, this is the more popular one, the one used most often. But let's go take a look. And if we were to add a second butterfly, okay, we would end up adding in, let me see, what's my next slide? Here it is. The strike price here and here, and then there's one down here that we're adding in to the first butterfly, which had a strike here, here, and then further way out there, okay? So this is what the risk graph would look like. Scaling in the second butterfly, we do the same thing. We just go to that short strike of 30, minus 30. We do the 5% further out of the money for that distant long put. And then we use the delta adjuster. But here's the kicker. When we use the delta adjuster, we're going to factor in the whole position. The whole position to find that extra strike. And as usual, we will favor 25-point strikes when possible. So here's the added strikes that we put on here, located, you know, visually. You can see them here, here, and over here. Okay, we added these. That then lifted this side up a little bit, and as you can see, so now we can see that this T plus 34 line is moving way the heck further out to the right here and above the zero break-even line. Okay, and so when you compare that to the way we had it before, okay, where was it? Yeah, from here to there, what we're doing from here is lifting this whole T plus 34 line up quite a bit to about there. Okay. Now, what happens here now? So this is what we're doing. We're adding that second butterfly. Now, we have the market taking off on the upside yet again. What do we do now? Okay, if it takes off to the upside again, going from here to there, we're kind of, and I'm tempted to call this whole campaign approach the alpine approach, because it's kind of like you're over your skis a little bit, right? We're skiing and we're beyond the tent. We feel safer in the tent because we know we have expiration profits. Here, we do not have expiration profits. It's just theoretically being modeled that we should be making money here with the positive theta over the next 33 days. Well, we're over our skis a bit. What are we going to do? What do we do here? Because this is getting kind of to be a very small little area that's theoretically modeling a daily profit. Let's zoom in a little bit, and here's what we have. Okay, we're making a small profit now. Every day we should be making more and more money, up to 5 and then 10 days. This is all theoretical, of course, and your models are very important, but this is where it's at. So we zoom in and we can see this picture. We see that we're definitely leaning short here. And the question here is what triggers us to do anything? So I'm just looking at this potential trigger, and I'm glad Frank is here because I'm sure he and I are going to address this later in a future phone call. But here's what I came up with as a potential trigger that tells you, hey, you know, you're kind of over your skis a little too much and you're not making much money for the risk that you have. All right, so here's what we do. We take theta minus the absolute value of delta. And we want that value to be at least 0.1% of our required capital. We want to make every day at least 0.1%. That would be roughly 3% a month. And that's minimum. That's minimum. So in this case, we can see that our theta is at 80.05. Our delta has gone to minus 31.58. That leaves us with 48.47. Now, is that 48 bucks coming in today worth this? Well, we have our initial requirement is 64.45. 64,482. This is, and so what's 0.1% of that number? $64.48. So you can see that the trigger has dropped way below that threshold. And yeah, you know, if it goes up, we're not going to lose much money, but we're not making much either. So we have to have a decision-making matrix or a format or a trigger that tells us, look, you know, we need to do something here. We need to do something so that we're making money here, because that's why we're doing this activity. We're not in it to just not lose. And so I'm throwing that out there. I'm glad Frank's watching. We're going to continue, and I'm going to continue diving into this adjustment trigger idea so that we have something to just everyone be on the same page with. So here are the things we could do. Let's examine the reverse Harvey. And this is talked about by a number of the approaches. It's named after Dan Harvey, who, by the way, was a mentoring student here at OptionVue many years ago, and he's gone on to do himself, you know, great things. And one of them is coming up with his own adjustment to this, which is kind of taken off, and everyone kind of talks about it a little bit because it makes a lot of sense. And that is, we roll the initial butterfly's long strike. So let's go take a look at what that means. So in the blue dots, you have the initial butterfly strikes. And what we're going to do is ignore the short strike, and we're going to go to where the longs are. We're going to roll both of those toward the short strike, and we're going to make sure we do it for a net credit. A net credit. If we do it for a net credit, it's going to lift the right side upward. That whole blue flat line here is going to get lifted straight up the screen, which is then going to help out, the alpine adventure we're having over here right now. So let's go and take a look at what that looks like in the matrix real quick. And I had to divide up my matrix quite in strikes. You can kind of see here between 2140 and 2280. I just omitted all those strikes to show you that we were rolling up the most distant 2125. I rolled it up to 2135. And then this long, I rolled downward towards, okay, I'm going back down towards where the short is. So this one we're rolling up. This one we're rolling down. And that conforms with what you see here. This one we're rolling up. This one we're rolling down. And when we do that, we're doing this, you can see, for a pretty fat credit. A pretty fat credit. So here we're doing this 5 times. This is what is going to be 39 cents times 5. This is going to be 24, 25, 26, 27, what? $2.90 times 5. So that's a big fat credit coming to us after we do this roll. And then when we combine both, we can see that the cash flow is now well up closer to 0 than where it was before. Also, by doing this, our net requirement really doesn't change that much. It went up just a little bit. So visually, here's what we have. We have this distant strike being rolled over to here. Okay, and then over here, this strike got rolled to here. You see that? And when we did that, it lifted the red line, or from the blue line up to the red. You can kind of see that lift that it got. And when we zoom in, and we're only doing it, we're only 5 points on the scale here, where that blue line went up to the red, closer to 0. You know, it was way down there, what, minus 1800 or something. And then the deltas are getting more balanced on the T plus 0 line. And then along the way, you can see that the break even 33 days out is far, way out to the right, much farther than where the current blue line is. And so this seems to be this is a popular adjustment for good reasons. It really does improve the situation quite a bit with this 4-legged roll that you see here. And when we do it, are we conforming with the trigger? Okay, if we looked at this, we have a theta, our new theta is at 75.76. Our delta is under 2, so that's a net of what? 70, let's just call it 74 and change. 74 and change is much higher than $65.12, so we're good there. We conform to the trigger, and this new picture is one that we can live with. We're getting paid for the efforts that we are exerting here. All right, now let's look at the possibility of buying a call. And this is something Frank will use off and on. And one of the nice things about this is it is the most direct way and simple way of balancing your delta. You just go out to the out-of-the-money calls, find one with the appropriate delta, and you can get that delta to close to zero with a single trade, lickety-split. Flatten that thing, and if the market keeps racing up, you're really covered well. All right, and there's a lot of benefits to that. One thing is that it may not conform to the triggers that we were discussing here, and that's why it's under review. And I know, I mean, the simplicity of this approach is on the plus side. On the minus side is you got the potential trigger that's not getting conformed with. So when we do this trade, you can see where we are with the blue line going to the red. Because we're spending money for that call, we're dropping the blue line down to the red. But when we zoom in and take a look at this, you can see that we're immediately flattening the blue line to the red, flat across a wide area here. We're keeping our theta positive, although it's not as positive as maybe we would like in accordance with that potential trigger that's under review. But if the market's racing up, this is something certainly that you'd want to take a look at doing. All right, and so this is something we can do as well as the reverse Harvey, and perhaps there's a way to combine approaches as well, but we're keeping this as simple as we can for now. Finally, let's take a look at rolling the short. Rolling the short. We go over here, and we were going to, in rolling the short strike right here, if we roll this up, because remember, I think in this example we sold it for about 31 and it's worth about 16 now. We've made about half the money on that short that we can. And the idea here is that by rolling it up, we're going to then gobble up more time premium that's going to then lift this whole thing straight up the screen. The blue line will get lifted. Now, when we roll the short, the spread between that strike and our initial long way down here that helped establish margin would widen. It would widen, and that would be bad. And what we need to do then is roll this distant long up as well. And we may even want to try and roll it a little bit more up and reduce our margin even more if we can and still maintain a good credit. So that's the idea here. When we go to the matrix and look, you can see that we're taking this short. We sold this for 31. We're going to buy it back and sell this for 18.40. We're doing 10 times about $2.38. And then down here, we're doing this roll here for a debit of about 39 cents times 5. So we have a net credit coming in. That lifts that blue line up the screen, and in fact results now in we're above the zero break-even line now. And our here's the kicker too. Need to know this. It's entirely possible that if you do this, because of the the math here, when you crunch through the spreads, our margin might go up. The margin level might go up because our max loss, if the market tanks and you let it go to expiration, would be the max. That represents the max loss when you analyze this. And indeed, that does work out to be the case. We're going from the blue line to the red. We're rolling this short up. Okay, we rolled this long up. All right, and when we did that, the blue line got lifted to the red. Now let's zoom in on it a little bit. We could see that the blue line expiration got lifted to the red. We're above the zero line. Okay, the blue line where we're delta short has now been flattened. We're leaning a little bit long right there in this approach. And in this particular case, the T plus 33 line blue got lifted up to the red. We're looking a lot better, but we are leaning a little bit long. For those of you that like to lean short, well, then you may want to adjust the strikes and adjust the roll a little bit. That's where you have to do the what-if analysis in spades and see that. Okay? But that's it. That's the index of approaches for adjusting this. Any questions? Frank or Jim, you're live here with us. I'm sure this will get a lot of recording. The recording is going to be posted and folks will watch it. And but that's what we got here. Is the just go back up. Can I do that? Oh, there we go. Okay, next time we'll cover this butterfly approach on the upside. But here we scaled in the second butterfly, and these are the things that we can do, and that we'll build a set of rules on. But I'm going to evaluate the out-of-the-money call butterfly on the upside as well, and then we'll come in for a landing on which approach to take, either door letter A or door letter B. Okay? All right. Super. Let me go down all the way. Folks, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next time with part 3 on adding that butterfly. Take care. Have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.